I'm on the edge of love and the cliffs of design. It's time for architecture, coffee, and ink. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing concepts, detailing out designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I am here today to start introducing you to the designs that make you wonder why. So I ask you to brew your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. I'm excited to have everyone join me today, and a belated Happy Valentine's Day. Whether you had someone special to celebrate with, or just some close friends and coworkers, I hope that everyone had a wonderful day. And today's episode was inspired by the holiday, as we are going to be talking about the Castle of Love, Swallow's Nest Castle, located in Yespera, Crimea, Ukraine. Before diving into the topic, I would like to remind everyone once again to always check your sources, check your facts, and most importantly, check me. And with that, I hope you grab a box of chocolates to go along with your coffee and enjoy the show. Before diving straight into the Swallow's Nest and its unique history, let's talk a bit about Neo-Gothic architecture, which, spoiler, the castle is identified as. Now, for those who followed the more traditional path of design, you have probably had multiple classes waxing poetic about Gothic versus Neo-Gothic and the arts and crafts movement versus Art Deco. However, for those of you who are a bit more like me when I first started grad school, let's take a moment to break down the history and the characteristics. Let's start by breaking down the name Neo-Gothic. Neo comes from the Greek word neos, spelt as N-E-O-S, and means new. So when it's used as a prefix, it implies a rejuvenation or a new iteration. And I chose those words specifically as the other name for Neo-Gothic style / architecture is Gothic Revival. The original Gothic style originated from Europe and is associated with the Middle Ages or medieval time period. In terms of dates, this would make it the predominant style between the 12th through the 16th centuries. Fast forward to the late 1700s through early 1800s, when England was just entering the Victorian era. During this time, a movement was started to bring back and revitalize the original Gothic style. It started with private dwellings first, before trickling over into the public sector and larger scale buildings. Some of the classic features from the original Gothic movement were continued into the revival, such as the points, equally elegant and grotesque carvings, strong defined lines, and pinnacles. Overall, ornamentation is the key element associated with both movements. Of course, beside castles, the other buildings most commonly associated with this style are churches, but there are actually several skyscrapers that are considered neo-Gothic as well. Gargoyles, stained glass windows, spectacular arches, stone and masonry work remain strong features that are not required, but very likely to be included as well. Of course, the question is, why was there a shift back to a prior architecture style? Well, it was driven in no small part by the romanticization of the Middle Ages. As time moved forwards, people focused on Lancelot instead of lancing legions, and it was for a variety of reasons that society was craving that sense of pseudo-nostalgia. But one of the most likely driving factors was the need for comfort during a time of unrest. Although we tend to think of this time period now as being comparatively stable, there would have been a couple of wars, several tragic events, and a lot of social upheaval and discontent to dramatically understate things. Thus, a sense of idolizing simpler times, a stronger leaning into religion, and the urge to seek out structure. But today, I'm going to tell you a story that I quite frankly, I don't know if it's true. I will tell you everything I have uncovered, all of the myths and the legends, and I want something from you, my Inkwell detective. After I have told my story, told you all the discrepancies and the truth of a love, I want you to write in. Tell me what you know, and maybe, just maybe, we can find a truth long since forgotten. Swallow's Nest Castle is located, as I mentioned before, in Yaspera, Crimea, Ukraine, in between the famous towns of Yalta and Zimayis. It is actually considered to be one of the famous Yalta attractions, despite being roughly 11 meters away from the city itself. It is located on a 40 meter or 131.2 foot high cliff called Aurora, named after the Roman goddess of the dawn. This cliff is situated on the Black Sea, overlooking the rest of the Cape of Aitodor. Given a bit of geographical context, Crimea is a peninsula, which is a body of land surrounded by water on 3 sides that is connected to the Ukraine and is primarily surrounded by the waters of the Black Sea. Specifically, one side of it is the Sea of Azov, and on the others is the Black Sea. Additionally, the Crimean Peninsula has several pink lakes on it, and another wetland that is also famously red in color. With the pink lakes, the most famous is the Koyeskoye Salt Lake, while the wetland is located up north, closer to mainland Ukraine, and is called the Sivosh, or Sivosh with an I, which translates to the Rotten Sea. Now, as I mentioned, they are called pink lakes as they are visibly pink in color, and this coloration is due to the presence of algae. All of these bodies of water also have a high salt content. Throughout the history of the peninsula, multiple countries and people have conquered and colonized the region, giving the area an extremely rich history and leaving tantalizing ruins dotting the landscape. The towns of Yalta and Yespera are both located on the coast of the Black Sea, with the Crimean Mountains between them and the rest of Ukraine. While Yalta is known for being associated with the Swallow Castle, Yespera is considered to be a spa town and the home of it. Notable figures such as Leo Tolstoy, who wrote Anna Karenina and War and Peace, have called the region home for a while. The towns of Yalta and Yespera may be well known, but the Black Sea, which they border, has left its own mark on history, appearing in many myths and legends. And speaking on myths, before we dive into the stories and history, I do need to take a moment and let everyone know that this episode relied pretty heavily on a mixture of translations, both my own and internet provided ones. However, it was through the exercise of translating and fact-checking that I was able to start recognizing where some of the gaps between sources truly lay. One of the biggest was the translation of the name Swallow's Nest. I noticed a couple of sources list the name as bird home, and searching for that as well as searching for the Russian and Ukrainian equivalents produced dramatically different levels of research with wildly conflicting names for everything and everyone. For those of you who might not be familiar with what a swallow is, they are a small bird with predominantly blue, brown, or tan feathers with white markings. They are typically located in the northern hemisphere. There are multiple classifications of swallows, but overall they are considered extremely graceful creatures and have long been associated with beauty, especially in the Ukraine. Several of them also have an extremely distinctive nest, which is why they are also associated with family and home. Let me tell you all of the names associated with the castles. In Ukrainian, it is known as Lasnechivne Hizno, Russian, Las Continual Hezno, and in German, Schweivenist. This will all become important later on. I apologize again if I mispronounced the names. This is a podcast here to celebrate and respect all of the cultures and the people we talk about, but unfortunately, I am still human and prone to making mistakes. Let's start first with the myths before moving into the history and architecture. The most prevalent story starts with a weathered soldier who lived too long and saw too much through the trials of war, and it was at its end that he was finally able to seek out peace as a retired man. Some sources say that he had lost more than he bargained for in the war. In some versions, he was a young, recently wed man and was visiting the area on the eve of his honeymoon, while in others he comes alone, bracing himself upon his cane. Either way, he carries himself up the rocks and on to the top of the cliff. And it is here that he either finds his love or swears it away forever to the sky and the sea, building a wooden home and dubbing it his Castle of Love. In some versions, it's not the view over the edges of the cliffs that captivates him, but a tree that has made its home upon the rocks. No one knows whether it was a love of the area, love of a companion, or a gift for a lover that drove him to settle down on the top of the cliff. And while we will discuss in a little bit just what happened to that original wooden structure, it was eventually replaced multiple times over the years until it became the castle that is so well known today. And yet, despite this largely unknown origin, this castle appears in multiple articles about love and architecture. And the worst part is, no one even knows who he was. In all of my sources, the original soldier is always stated as just that, a nameless soldier or general, the unknown soldier or the unknown general, a mysterious canvas only known by the love he shared, though what that love is or was for is completely unknown. All that is known is that he was once capable of a great love, but this area was originally settled before that. We will go through the history chronologically, a bit of a first for me on the show. There was a Roman military settlement that was established in the 1st century and abandoned before it ended. Reportedly, it was rediscovered and re-abandoned over the years. And truthfully, while the site carries the name Shara, it seems that several sources couldn't agree about whether or not it was the infamous settlement named Shara or not. I also can't tell if it is a real place or if the articles are actually referring to the Chersonesus or the National Preserve of the Taro Chersonesus, which is a Dorian-style Greek city an hour and a half away by car. It also has St. Vladimir's Cathedral nearby, which explains why I kept seeing references to monasteries. Of course, the articles could also be referring to a cave monastery nearby. If you decide to research this further yourself, please be careful in determining if the articles you are translating isn't already using a translation. Like many stories of conquest, the annexation of Crimea to Russia in 1783 played a huge role in the history of the place. Once the area had been taken over, there was an influx of wealthy upper class into the region to buy the land and cultivate a relaxing oasis for themselves. This occurred over multiple years, as in many cases they were buying the land and building castles, manors, and mansions. And while today we might complain because our new bathroom tile has a 3-week shipping time, it takes a lot longer for it to be carved by hand. The nameless general built the first wooden structure somewhere between years 1877 and 1878. It was believed that he would have participated in the Russo-Turkish War. However, given that we don't know who he is or anything about him, I'm not really willing to testify that he was a general, much less what war he was in. What we do know next is that a doctor was then the second owner of the property and home, and by that time, it is extremely likely that parts of the house had already been repaired and replaced multiple times. All versions of the castle were always on the cliffs, and thus exposed to the elements and seismic activity, earthquakes, and the like. Supposedly, this doctor used it as a practice and would board patients. However, I noticed that some sources seem to change if it was a practice or just a boarding house, or a combination of both. The other fact that seems to change from source to source is who the doctor was exactly. All sources confirm that he practiced in court, most likely to the Tsar of Russia, but the name changes dramatically. One lists him as Dilberg Tobin, another as A.K. Tavin with a V, and one source that I ended up not using listed him as Dr. Eugene Botkin. If you don't have a science background, you probably won't know much about him, given that he was overshadowed in popular culture by Rasputin. Both he and Rasputin were in service of the last Tsar and his infamous daughter, the Grand Duchess Anastasia Romanov. Either way, the castle soon left the doctor's possession and was sold to the Shminin or the Rachmanova family, depending upon the source. From there, ownership was passed to the wife and eventually it was sold. One source says that at this point, the original building was completely demolished. And while we cannot confirm this either way, what we do know for a fact is that over the years, multiple paintings of the area have surfaced with what are suspected to be versions of the home at various points in its history. My favorite aspect of this is that because so much isn't known about the castle, it's hard to prove that the paintings created over the years by various artists weren't correct at some point in time. Continuing on with the story, the then wooden castle was purchased by a German oil tycoon, Baron von Steinheim, or the oil tycoon's nephew, P.L. Steingill, and redesigned into a neo-Gothic stone castle by architect Leonid Sherwood. He created the breathtaking masterpiece that completely enchanted everyone who passed by. Several articles will claim various castles throughout Western Europe inspired the design, though they have dramatically different styles. I personally lean more towards believing that the inspiration of the client came from his own experiences growing up on the continent of Europe and Germany. Unfortunately, looming tensions caused the property to quickly be turned over to a new owner due to the rising tensions prior to World War I. Pavel Shalabutin was the one who purchased it, and he is credited with the name Swallow's Nest being associated with the castle. However, rumors across several articles actually led me to believe that it was named while underneath the care of a manager. Shilabutin apparently died shortly after purchasing it, and due to the age of his heirs, the manager took over running the castle. This manager has no name that I could find and reliably cross-checked. To be honest, I feel like the most pivotal moments in history for this building are the smallest. They have the least amount of information, but these moments seem to have reshaped the whole future of the property. This manager opened the first in a series of restaurants, starting in 1914 when Shilaputin passed away. This lasted until 1917, when it became a tourist location up until 1927. During that year, tragedy struck when an earthquake hit the area. During this earthquake, the garden that was originally part of the castle fell into the sea, along with some minor pieces of the castle. While the castle itself was overall relatively unharmed, the cliff couldn't say the same. In addition to pieces of the castle breaking off, a large crack emerged. After this, the 1930s saw a reading club from the nearby Jemchuzina Sanatorium using the space. Here is where I strongly believe another nickname from the castle came from, though I have absolutely no proof whatsoever, and it could literally be just one cosmic joke. One of the other names for the castle is, quote, White Pearl, assumably because of the white stone. However, Jemchuzina means pearl, and I can't help but wonder if it is through this association with the reading club that this nickname originated. After this, the castle was closed down for 40 years, and during this time and the periods in between owners, was looted often. In 1968, there was an extensive set of repairs to the castle that were undertaken and would be repeated often throughout the years. Every so often, something would open again, such as another restaurant in 2011, and then a museum a few years later. During the many renovations, Swallow's Nest was extensively restored, and the goal of each newly established business determined on whether or not the restorations were true to the original design. The architecture, regardless of what building was being housed inside, always stood out. The whole building is 20 meters by 10 meters by 12 meters and originally had a foyer, guest room, tower, and large central room. In the towers are two smaller bedrooms, and it mentions several times that various things were moved over the years closer inside and away from the cliff. So when I keep referencing this cliff or saying that the castle juts over the cliffs, I mean that literally part of the viewing platform juts out over the edge. It's gorgeous. And this cantilevered observation platform allows maximum enjoyment of the views of the cape. However, one question you might ask is how no one fell off when the earthquake struck that I previously mentioned. Apparently, during the earthquake, there were two waves. The first wave was the smaller of the two, and it was the second larger wave that resulted in the garden falling. Luckily, when the first one had hit, everyone began to evacuate, and no casualties occurred when the cliff fell and the remainder of the castle stayed on the cliff's edge. Despite this, the stones and arches are absolutely mesmerizing to look at, and the whole thing is incredibly quaint and small. It reminds me in no small way of a play castle and seems to sort of thing of a children's dreams. The castle has been an inspiration for countless paintings and art, and rumored to have been painted by one of my favorite painters, Ivan Ivasovsky, who, surprise, surprise, was a marine and landscape painter, was at one point the painter for the Russian Navy. However, there's also debate among my sources for whether or not it was included in one of his paintings. Ivanovsky was an Armenian painter who is considered to be one of the most prolific painters of his time. To clarify, we're talking thousands of paintings, not hundreds. For those in America who are old enough to remember some of the old educational CD-ROMs that would have come out around the same time as Bill Nye the Science Guy's original run, I promise you have seen at least one of his works. That being said, most of the controversy behind this is the fact that what is seen in the painting is clearly styled different from the actual castle. It's become a bit of a mystery in its own right, because what he depicts isn't the wooden structure, but a completely different castle style. In more recent history, the castle has been featured on several coins and has served as a huge tourist attraction. Multiple movies have been filmed here over the years, including a Jackie Chan movie and several mysteries. Additionally, there have been concerts, ceremonies, and a wishing tree that is still tied with ribbons, as far as I can tell. The interiors were considered to be overall minimal and tidy rooms. When it was last opened, Swallow's Nest focused more on exhibits and providing information. Unfortunately, in 2019, the castle once again closed down for need restorations. There have been multiple talks over the years of moving the castle away from the edge, and doing so brick by brick to preserve as much of the original architecture and design as physically possible. However, every time the talks to do more have remained unfruitful, and the castle still stands on the edge, with the observation deck jutting out over the cliff face. However, as an effort to maintain the safety of the castle, they had installed an earthquake pad to combat the crack in the cliff, accomplished while being suspended down over the cliffs. So now, my Inkwell detectives, I want to issue you this challenge. I want to fill in as much of the unknown as possible. It is always possible that a source exists that remains a much more detailed history that I simply am not familiar with. But I think that a love like that, a love that inspired years of history, deserves to be recorded. Thank you, everyone, for joining me again this week on the show. Next week is going to be another multiple episode week. However, I'm going to spread out the episodes throughout the week. This will hopefully, fingers crossed, be the last of my weird delayed weeks. But in the next couple weeks, we are going to have a couple of bonus episodes scattered throughout as I catch up on things. Check out the blog as always for the transcripts, show notes, and sources, and additional exclusive information that I don't have time to talk about on the show. As always, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. If you want to see more content, you can find me on Instagram at Architecture Coffee and Ink, or hit me up at my regular Insta if you really like iPhone photography. Email the show at architecturecoffeeandink@gmail.com, or the blog at architecturecoffeeandink.com, with that's being spelled A-N-D. Architecture Coffee and Ink is a Hollywood C Studios LLC production, and I am excited to meet with all my designers, streamers, and DIY enthusiasts next time. But in the meantime, may your coffee mugs be full and your inkwells never run dry.